Good evening. It's Sunday, November 30th. This is your weather enthusiast, Simcha Lefton. You're listening to Weather with Enthusiasm. We have a very unique situation that took place across the Chicago area. But before we get there, we're just going to say that major winter storms are produced in the Midwest by three essential ingredients. All of these ingredients were pretty much here. You have an Arctic air mass, copious amounts of Gulf moisture, and a strong low-pressure system. When those three things come together, the Midwest gets a major winter storm of 6 inches of snow or more. That's how it's defined by the National Weather Service. That's something that came together over this past Shabbos. But what makes this particular storm system really unique, it's something that people living outside Chicago might not have been able to pick up on. And even if you're living in Chicago, unless you're really focusing on this, you probably didn't pick up on it. But, so the Midwest gets these storms of 6 to 12 inches. It's common to get that in the bullseye of these winter storms that have access to Gulf moisture. The Gulf moisture really picks up those inches and picks up the accumulations, and the accumulations are commonly near a foot with Gulf moisture storms. That's what happens. This particular storm, we actually had an area in Iowa and Illinois, even portions of Wisconsin, where snowfall accumulations went beyond a foot. We had some areas that got 15 inches in Iowa. But that's not really so unusual. But the time of the year that this occurred, that's unusual. It occurred in November, not January or even December. But for the Chicago people, there's something even more rare about this. We're going to talk about that in just a second. I do want to point out, though, that we did break a record here at the Chicago O'Hare Airport for the largest amount of snow for any calendar day in November. That record was set yesterday at 8.4 inches. The previous record was 8 inches even, set back in 1951. So it's over 70 years ago. And, usually there's no big significance to the fact that the snow fell over a particular calendar day versus a storm in general. But in this particular case, there is significance. And here's why. Because this storm really was something phenomenal for people living near Lake Michigan. In the month of November, the only time you're going to get really big snows in the Chicago area is basically never, because in the Chicago along Lake Michigan, Chicago is basically never, because it's the only time it's going to be lake effect snow, but it's going to have to be an extremely cold air mass that moves over the lake, because the lake water temperatures are so warm. If the air mass is not super cold, the precipitation is going to end up falling as rain. Unbelievably, we had that earlier this month. That's a rarity. We had that here in Chicago, and we had some areas that got 14 inches of snow from that. Other areas, they got much less. That's the nature of lake effect snow. Probably anywhere from 2 to 14 inches is what happened earlier in the month. The snow came down pretty heavy. We also had, in that system, we also had ground to cloud lightning. We had that in that system, and we had snow sprout. We have water spouts, and then we had snow spouts that occurred as well in that system. It's actually the second time ever that the National Weather Service had to issue a special marine warning for a snow spout. This is going back on the November 9th storm, back in that weekend. But that's something that we got earlier in this November. That was something remarkable because of the time of year that it happened. And Chicago in general, as we spoke about then, doesn't usually get lake effect snow. We get lake enhancement, but not lake effect snow. But not only did Chicago get it, but it happened in the month of November. That's something rare. But here's something even more rare. This is even more rare. What happened yesterday is more rare because for a storm system, a southern stream storm, a storm system, a powerhouse. Well, let's not say the word powerhouse, but an organized storm system to move through the Midwest with Gulf moisture, Chicago has to end up on the cold side of the storm, as does any city. You have to end up on the cold side of the storm. If you're on the warm side of the storm, you're in the southeast portions of the storm, the precipitation is going to fall as rain, and you're often going to have mild temperatures. So you end up, the cities almost always end up in northeast winds. In fact, that's so common that some of these computer programs that have been in existence for many, many years, where they say type in the weather conditions and it's going to tell you the weather forecast in the next few hours. One of those conditions is northeast winds. That's how it's going to tell you if there'll be a blizzard or not. You have to have those northeast winds. So Chicago, you need to have those northeast winds. The big storms always produce those northeast winds. And here's another thing. Many people might think that the nor'easters, the big storms that move up the East Coast and affect the northeast part of the United States, many people might think that they get their name after the portion of the United States that they impact, the northeast. That's why they're called nor'easters. Actually, their name actually comes from the strong northeast winds that they produce. So the stronger storms, the ones that are going to be producing the significant snow, the more than 6 inches, those are the ones that are going to have the northeast winds. But the problem in Chicago, the reason why you can't get a November storm, and as everything is, you can't do it until you do it. But in November, the problem is, once again, the Lake Michigan water temperatures are so warm that any storm where you're going to have northeast winds, granted at O'Hare Airport, you might get a lot of snow, but in West Rogers Park or in Chicago itself near the lake, it's just not going to amount to much because the warm air off the lake is going to change the precipitation to rain and at the very least eat into those snow totals. So we've seen some official storms that have been quite high at O'Hare Airport in the month of November, even one in the year 2015, which was more than 11 inches. But you speak to people in Chicago, they'll tell you they barely saw an inch. That this system was unique because we had a storm system, we had an organized storm system, access to copious amounts of Gulf moisture, not just Gulf moisture. This storm system even had access to tropical moisture from the Pacific Ocean. This system had a lot of moisture to it. It was an organized storm system. It wasn't very intense. The barometric pressure dropped to about 29.7 in Chicago, and that was the center barometric pressure. It's gradually strengthened to 29.6 over the past 12 hours. But it's been, a moderate intensity storm system, but the cold air was very close to the center. And as such, Chicago was able to get snow while being under south winds. That's what we had yesterday. We ended up getting a 6+ inch snowstorm. And I would say it's not just that. It was 8 inches almost everywhere. It's like a solid 8 inches. We have, the official amounts, or these amounts that the National Weather Service comes out with. You have Skokie, it's reporting 10 inches. Evanston, it reports 8.9 inches. West Rogers Park is also, I believe, 8.9 inches or 8.8. There's the whole list. There's one area further towards Wisconsin at 11 inches. But even down in Joliet, it's still 8 inches. There's 8 inches in so many areas, 8 inches. And even the portions which are 10 inches, a lot of times by the time the snow is finished, it's also down to 8 inches. So it's a very solid 8 inches. That's also something that's unusual for Chicago. The classic Chicago setup is there's an enormous amount of snow just to the north, very little snow to the south, and then like 3 to 6 inches along Chicago. A common thing would be 1 to 3 to the south, 6 to 12 to the north, 3 to 6 right in the city. This system just had 8 inches. It was a widespread 8 inches. We had some areas that got a little bit more. There was no lake effect, and if, the surface winds did not allow for lake effect snow to develop. You have to take a look at what the winds were like 5,000 feet above the surface to be able to see whether there could have been lake effect at some point or lake enhancement. But in general, this system, we had the south winds. We basically had no wind. For much of it, we barely had any wind because we were so close to the center of the storm. So the synoptic setup for this system was an ideal setup to get a November winter storm. It was not an ideal setup for a blizzard, but had we have had an ideal setup for a blizzard, Chicago wouldn't have gotten anything. We would have gotten just some snowflakes, but most of it would have fallen as rain. This is the best we can possibly do for Chicago. You have to come up with a southern stream storm that somehow is able to produce snow in the month of November without winds being from the northeast. That's what has to happen. And that's what happened here in Chicago. Not just that, it was very impactful. It was an impactful 8 inches. It's solid. It's not melting. It's here. And it's impacting really the entire Chicago metro area. Very solid. We pointed out that some places got almost double that when you get further into the Illinois-Iowa border. Places getting close to 15 inches around there, and also portions of Wisconsin. In some areas, they got more than 12 inches. But in general, it's been a lot of snow. Hannibal, Missouri got 8 inches of snow. St. Louis, Missouri, already as of yesterday afternoon was at 6.5 inches. So there's a lot of snow in some cities further south. But in a certain way, it's more magnificent, the fact that it snowed here in Chicago, even though we're further north, but it's because we have that lake, which makes it almost impossible for a southern stream storm to produce snow, as opposed to the Alberta Clippers. Clippers come in all the time. November, we've seen several storms, Alberta Clippers, that come in, where you come in with south winds and you get snow. You get a few inches of snow. But to have a southern stream storm that comes in like this, and you get winds off the Gulf of Mexico, moisture from the Gulf of Mexico, the tropical Pacific Ocean, you get all that, and you get this amount of snow. That's something which is unusual. And the fact that we have two unusual events occurring in the same month, both of them revolving around snow, gives you the continuous feeling, that feeling for all the snow lovers that have had that this winter is going to be quite a season. There's been that feeling, and people have been talking about it. This kind of is a support to that. We're dealing with 2 for 2 right now, 2 storms that generally you need just a certain amount of variables to come together for this system to happen here in Chicago, and things came together just right for both of them to produce a significant winter storm. Here's another thing to keep in mind, is that this is the largest amount of snowfall that fell at O'Hare Airport since January 30th to January 31st, 2021. Now, I will tell you, though, that's what it said on the National Weather Service website, but I don't understand how that could be true, because February 14th, 2021, I thought they got more snow then. I thought we got 10.3 inches then. So I thought O'Hare Airport got 10 back then, and then West Rogers Park got 18 inches back then. There's a podcast that I did back then that was already 4 years ago. Unbelievable. 4 years ago. So I don't know. It could be that was a mistake in the National Weather Service website, where they say that January 30th to 31st was either the National Weather Service or the Weather Prediction Center that was saying that this was the largest snow, the official amount, since January 30th to 31st, 2021. It's very hard to hear that. In fact, perhaps they meant to say 2022. That's another possibility, because there was a significant lake effect event, a lake effect snow event that happened around that time in 2022. So it's more likely 2022. It's more likely we're dealing with that. But, it could be there's a mistake either in the month, the date, or the year. Could be there's a mistake there in the National Weather Service website. But regardless as to what that is, this is the most significant snow we've seen in quite a while. It's been at least several years, and it's occurring here in the month of November. It's the second one this month, the second significant snow this month. And this is also, we did break a record for a calendar day, although that on paper is not significant because it's just a calendar day. But in reality, it is significant because it really was a very significant event to be happening here in the Chicago area for the month of November. We could read those snow totals. We could get through with those snow totals. We basically said the general range, which was, 8 to 11 inches around the Chicago area. We got some areas of 12 and more inches when you get into southern Wisconsin and you go further west of Chicago. Let's get on talking for the next storm system. We already have 2 storm systems on the way for this week. So the first one, all right, we take a look at what's going on for tomorrow. So tomorrow's a very interesting system once again. A lot of times every system is interesting, but for tomorrow's system, you really have to be a computer expert. You have to really know how to read the computer models to be able to find the storm system. The storm that you don't need to be an expert on is the storm developing on the Gulf Coast for tomorrow. That's a powerhouse storm regarding the synoptic setup. Eventually, it's going to be a powerhouse storm from barometric pressure alone. But, when you look at it, that's very easily identifiable It's on the Gulf Coast. It develops from, we have a trough of low pressure, which is moving into the plains, and we have a weather disturbance in the central plains. We also have something taking place in the four-cornered area over the Four Corner states. That all moves to the east, and it kind of collides, and it's going to produce a major storm system by the Gulf Coast. That's for tomorrow and Tuesday. That then moves onto the east coast and pushes up the coast, bringing a heavy snowstorm for areas inland by the northeast. Okay, but here's things are a little bit more complex. So there's another system that's going to be an offshoot of this one, an offshoot of the Gulf of Mexico one. So the moisture that's feeding into the system technically is Gulf of Mexico moisture, but when you look at the map, it's very clear that the moisture it's limited. It's cut off a little bit because system number one is absorbing a lot of that moisture. That's what it looks like to me. But nonetheless, the QPFs have gone up over the past couple of hours, over the past 12 hours, let's say. We were holding at the forecasted amount of 1/10 to 2/10 of an inch of QPF totals. It looks like right now, some areas may even see 3/10 of an inch of QPF totals, which if you're dealing with a snow to water ratio of 15 to 1, you could end up with 4 inches, maybe even an isolated spot of 5 inches somewhere within the Missouri and Illinois area, somewhere in between the St. Louis and Chicago area. That's something that could happen for tomorrow afternoon into tomorrow night. It's difficult to find the low pressure system unless you're using a high resolution model where you will see a little low pressure system that starts to develop and starts to become a little bit more organized over in the Kentucky area, maybe southern Indiana, as it moves into the Ohio Valley later on Tuesday. But even then, it's not completely organized because eventually all of its energy moves on to the East Coast and turns into one gigantic, widespread, well-organized storm system when it hits the East Coast and moves up the coast. Until that point, though, the systems are, if you were to judge them by barometric pressure, it's relatively weak. We have a 29.9-inch low. That's the barometric pressure over the Gulf Coast. What makes it strong is its location, picking up copious amounts of Gulf moisture, and we have that little Arctic air mass coming in on the backside. So, but the snow doesn't hit until areas hundreds of miles to the north of this low pressure system. So low pressure system number 2 is what it is. It's 29.9 and it's a weak system. That's what it is. That's what we're getting. So system number 1 is also 29.9, but at least it's on the Gulf of Mexico. So it picks up a lot of moisture. Some of that moisture gets put into the system further upstream, which is also 29.9. Eventually both systems collide and form as 29.5 off the mid-Atlantic coast. And that thing rapidly intensifies as it moves up the coast, producing a foot of snow when you head into the northeast. Inland locations, but not the coastal cities as of right now. That's the coastal cities should remain. The precipitation should not be in the form of snow. So the Chicago area will be getting another good chance for weather advisory material, not winter storm warning material, but the timing also is expected to be during rush hour, tells us the National Weather Service. It's a fluffy snow of perhaps 1 to 4 inches or something like that. That's what we could expect for tomorrow night. It would be hard to say, you can't really call it a clipper. It's like, there's no generic term you could really use. It's a trough of low pressure that moves into the Colorado area, also the four-cornered states, that desert southwest area, and then a disturbance in the central plains. They kind of collide together, and you produce your QPF of about 2/10 of an inch. Coming down here in Chicago tomorrow night, you can get 3-4 inches, 2 to 4 inches. We said 1 to 4 inches, maybe 2 to 4 inches, something like that for tomorrow night. Then we have another snow event. I wouldn't call it a storm. And tomorrow night also, it's questionable whether we can call it a storm or not as of right now. But the important thing to point out is that the global models have not been as good as picking it up as the high resolution models from what I saw. So the National Weather Service continues to wait until we get closer to the event till we have higher resolution models, which actually, as we speak, they probably do have the information at this point to go ahead and put accurate forecast snowfall accumulations. But headed into the next one is just an Arctic cold front that will be producing snow along the front. That's something that comes in Wednesday, Thursday. And then we have another system. This one might have the three ingredients once again necessary to produce a 6-inch snowstorm here in the Midwest. Arctic air definitely has copious amounts of Gulf moisture and a strong storm system that moves through over the weekend, Friday night into Shabbos. And then again on Sunday, we have another system that's going to be moving through. That one also, we could be seeing again several more inches of snow. So these are the various systems that are coming up for the next, we just mentioned 4 systems. System number 1 could produce a few inches. Number 2 is just the front. Number 3, a lot of question marks go out about number 3, about where will it snow, but there likely will be snow and accumulating snow Friday night into Shabbos. And then system number 4, I have not looked at too much, but we do have more on the way. Something that's really remarkable that's been on the weather map for quite a while is this like a polar vortex type thingy that's on the map December 10th into December 11th. It kind of comes out of the Hudson Bay. You see it in the 500 MB charts. You look at the temperatures up there dropping to 30 below, maybe even 40 below zero. And that intensifies, that the peak intensity is actually no longer in Canada or the very southern portion of Canada. It really starts to come down south as you head into the middle part next week. And that what many might even call a polar vortex, something like that. So that would be impacting the Midwest or East Coast or somewhere in between. And we would likely see some type of a storm system develop around that time. That's something to keep an eye on as well. But for right now, it's a beautiful snow. It happened in a beautiful way. It happened in a day when people could actually enjoy the snow because there's not much travel. And it also came down not in an aggressive way. People were very surprised. Some people were very surprised at how high the snowfall accumulated and surprised at how not heavy it was, even though we have reports of it being heavy, but it really came down more at a moderate pace. There was not much wind. It wasn't like an aggressive, harsh storm. It just piled up really high, much higher than what some people's expectations were. So we're looking at, again, the forecast called for 4 to 8 inches. I think on my podcast, I said 3 to 8 inches. And really the Chicago area got a solid 8 inches or even more. Some places got a couple inches more than 8 inches. And that's just something really impressive to get here in November. So the winter lovers have reason to look forward and to be optimistic this year. And it's been many years since we've had something like this where we're on a streak. We'll see how long we can keep it going. A lot of times weather pattern changes in the mid part of the winter, but a lot of times whatever the pattern is in the beginning, it kind of continues that way until the mid part. So there's reason to be optimistic. I also got a call saying there's an SSW, a sudden stratosphere warming, which 70% of the time leads to a polar vortex in about 2 to 3 weeks from now. So that's something that occurred recently. So these are things that will be on the lookout for the next couple of weeks. Also, people living in southeast Missouri could also might want to take a look at the weather for tomorrow night. Perhaps some sleet or some light snow, some type of frozen precipitation in some of the more southern places as well. Tomorrow's already December. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your interest. I wish everybody a wonderful week and stay safe.